Last week, we actually published a story about the Charles Koch Foundation, the foundation of billionaire industrialist Charles Koch, and the conservative lawyer group, the Federalist Society, combining to donate $30 million to George Mason University's law school in order to change its name to the Antonin Scalia School of Law. That's named after the late conservative Supreme Court Justice Scalia. So what that granted was it gave a lot of scholarship money to students that scholarship money would go back into the university as general funds, and then they would hire 12 professors, many of whom have connections to the Federalist Society. The Charles Koch Foundation is known for giving university donations of millions of dollars apiece, especially to George Mason University. It turns out that two veterans of the Koch higher ed and political networks are now at the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, and they're in the final stages of creating a new office of economics and analytics. So basically, Ajit Pai, who's the FCC chairman, is known as a free market kind of anti-regulation figure. He used to work as a general counsel for Verizon, if that tells you anything. He announced this last year, saying it'll have a market-based approach to communications regulation. So what this office is going to do is it's going to work with all the different bureaus within the FCC, and it's going to provide economic analysis and data ostensibly to back up some of the policies that are going to be being produced and coming out of those bureaus and the FCC. And what this marks is a bit of a shift in priorities for the FCC, which was created in 1934 by Congress with the responsibility to serve the public interest, convenience, and necessity. And what's happening right now is you have two very anti-regulatory essentially Koch alumni who are heading up an agency that's supposed to analyze the regulations to see if they're economically feasible, if they pass a cost-benefit analysis. And they don't appear to be considering the public benefit, or at least ranking the public benefit as the number one purpose of the FCC. They're kind of turning it into more of a market-based communications commission. Something that Pai also said that day was the FCC should have the economic experts it needs to identify market failures and study whether the benefits of commission action would be warranted given the costs. So that's a succinct description of really what it's going to be doing. And when you have people who are clearly anti-regulation who are doing this kind of analysis, it makes you wonder what kind of leaning is the analysis going to have. And I think, from what I'm telling you today, I mean, you'll probably get a pretty good idea of what's probably going to happen. So the two characters are Wayne Layton. He is the main person setting up this Office of Economic Analysis. He was previously executive vice president of the Charles Koch Foundation. That's the foundation that just gave money to George Mason, that often funds George Mason's Mercatus Center, a free market think tank on campus, and many other school programs, mainly free market economic programs. Before that, Layton was head of government affairs for Koch Industries. So he's worked not only for the Koch's business, but for the Koch Foundation. He's a consummate Koch insider. There's little question about that based on his past. And he also earned his economics PhD at George Mason, where he studied at the Mercatus Center. And just to give you guys an example of something that he has written, he wrote a paper in 2009. He wrote on wireless regulation at the time. He said, "The proposed regulations cannot be justified," and I'm reading from directly quoting him here, "on grounds of market failure. Rather than increasing innovation and consumer choice as promised, they would severely disrupt the wireless sector's highly successful business model and significantly reduce innovation and consumer choice." So, what we have here is a person who appears fairly committed to this sort of idea of consumer choice over the public benefit. The other character is Jerry Ellig, whom Ajit Pai named chief economist of the FCC in July of 2017, and he was specifically brought on to help out with the formation of this office. He's taking a year of absence from his professorship at George Mason. That should be fairly telling as to where his allegiances lie. And actually, interestingly enough, when Ellig was at the Mercatus Center, a main trade group for the telecom industry, the Internet and Television Association, was funding Mercatus and may still be funding Mercatus. According to tax records that I reviewed, from 2010 to 2015, this trade group was giving, totaled $750,000 worth of donations to Mercatus, often for its technology policy program, which I would imagine Elig was working on. And there's more connections between these two men and the Kochs, but I want to get into some questions. The first question is from Eric Byler. So he writes, in your article, Commissioner Rosenworcel sounds like a sensible public servant. And she is one of the Democratic commissioners. It's a 5-person commission, and she is one of 2 Democrats on the commission. The other 3 are Republicans. Can you run through the others of the FCC and tell us if there is a swing vote? Is there any reason to hope that it won't be a vehicle for advancing the interests of the telecommunications industry over those of the public? As far as I know, all 3 Republican commissioners are relatively on the same page. They just voted to reverse net neutrality, if that tells you anything. I think largely they're going to vote together on issues. I'm sure there could be some variance here and there, but this is one of those commissions that's set up so the president gets to appoint the members as their terms expire, and the makeup of the commission has to be 3 members of the president's party and 2 members of the opposing party. So we're going to have a 3-2 GOP majority until a Democrat wins the presidency, presumably. So I think that they are going to essentially be voting more towards the corporate interest than the public interest. Of course, we have to see more of these decisions, but I think net neutrality is a very good example of things to come. Here's another question, Tom Hendricks. And Tom Hendricks is concerned about the consolidation of media companies into a handful of large conglomerates, and how this has and will continue to lead to censored stories that do not get covered in corporate media, and certain art forms being favored over others. That's interesting. There are several major mergers that are before the FCC right now, so that's a very good question. First of all, we have excuse me for a second. There's the AT&T and Time Warner merger, which is pretty interesting because, you'd think that a lot of deregulators would probably be fine with these mergers. They just want the market to do its thing, to be unfettered by government regulation. But, interestingly, Trump has opposed this merger. There's a decent chance that it's because CNN is part of Time Warner, and he hates CNN, as he often spouts out on Twitter. So this could be a personal agenda rather than, really in line with the administration's general policy on businesses. You've also got the Sinclair broadcast group trying to buy the Tribune Media, which would largely increase the size and breadth of this really pro-Trump news source, Sinclair. And then you also have Sprint and T-Mobile trying to merge. These are 3 major mergers. My sense is that, most likely the commission will generally be in favor of these kinds of mergers. Again, with AT&T, Time Warner, I don't know. But we'll just have to kind of see. But yeah, that's sort of, my sense that they're going to enable these kinds of corporate mergers. I've got another comment here. Kevin Fletcher says, of course, they're looking out for the rich and screwing us. LOL. That's not. That's pretty accurate. I mean, this is something that we find routinely in Koch academics, in Koch political work. Generally, business interests. In the Koch's case, it's Koch Industries, which is their $115 billion industrial conglomerate business. These are the most important things, and therefore government should not be interfering with business in any way. Government should not be spending money on welfare programs or giving corporate handouts as they claim, but it should merely be extremely small and non-intrusive and let the free market do its work. Well, we've seen what happens when the free market does its work. We have financial crises like 2008 when you don't regulate financial businesses as well as you should. Another member of the commission, the panel that put together this policy proposal for the Office of Economics and Analytics, his name is Roger Wook. He actually worked in the telecom industry for about 15 years, and in the late 90s he worked at a company called US West. US West is now defunct. It split, and one part of the split ended up eventually being part of CenturyLink, which is a company that's going on today. So he worked at US West, and interestingly enough, Jerry Elig, one of these people I just mentioned, back in the 90s, he worked for a group called Citizens for a Sound Economy. Now, this group is the predecessor to Americans for Prosperity. That's Charles and David Koch's primary political nonprofit. It's a C4 social welfare nonprofit, and they do a lot of advocacy around politics. So when he was working for Citizens for a Sound Economy, U.S. West had been donating a lot of money to Citizens CSE, and then CSE was in turn helping lobby for reducing telephone regulations, long distance regulations that would affect U.S. West in a positive way. So this is someone who's has not only a history of ties to Koch, but history of ties to the telecom industry, who's now helping set up this data and analysis hub at the FCC, which is supposed to be regulating the telecom industry. John Lord says, it appears that the Kochs want to return to the early 1900s trust with them in the driver's seat. That's not out of whack to think that. I mean, they do really seem like the barons of yesteryear. They want to be as powerful as possible in politics and education. They want to be completely free from regulation, and they have no problem with owning $120 billion collectively. When you have entire communities starving in America, you have Flint doesn't have clean water after several years after it was contaminated. That's not something that they're concerned about. And what I kind of see running through all of the Koch activities and decisions over the decades, and I've reported a lot on the Kochs in the last 5 years, is almost all of their output and decisions can be traced back to increasing corporate profits for their business. And I've got a follow-up question from Eric Byler here. He says, since you mentioned Sinclair's intention to expand, could part of the goal here be to harness the power of mass communication technology for the purpose of advancing partisan political agendas? Or is this all about maximizing profit and the rest is collateral damage? That's an interesting question. I can't really credibly say I know the answer to it. I will say that something that raised eyebrows in the last few months was the Koch Industries bought, or at least the Koch brothers bought into Meredith Corporation, which runs Time, the magazine and website Time, and I think has some other media properties. So this was the first time that I know of that the Kochs actually are personally invested in media. They've certainly donated over the years to, Daily Caller. They're huge. Charles Koch is a massive donor to Daily Caller, if you guys didn't know that, and to other conservative kind of media outlets and conservative journalism programs. In terms of sort of manipulating mass communication technology to advance political agendas, I don't know. It certainly could be. I mean, one of their kind of, I guess, perhaps rival GOP mega donors, Robert Mercer, is now well known for being an investor in Cambridge Analytica, which certainly, as we've just recently discovered, manipulated a lot of data and user data that they weren't supposed to. Have access to that data, and it may have helped swing the election one way or the other. So I don't know, but I do think that it's something to watch out for. So that's a good question. Real quick, I just want to review something that we found as well. That Wayne Layton, who's again heading this office, his wife is Elizabeth Andrion, who one used to occupy his current position at the FCC, but now is a vice president for regulatory affairs at Charter Communications. That is a company that's regulated by the FCC. There don't appear to be any statements about this. I asked the FCC about this conflict of interest, and they didn't respond to any of my specific questions. And in fact, they denied me an interview with the spokesperson. So they're being very tight-lipped about this, about the whole, actually, in fact, about this whole new office, but also about this conflict of interest. I mean, you have someone who is regularly visiting the FCC, because I obtained the visitor logs as well via a Freedom of Information Act request. She's visiting her husband a lot. She's also visiting other officials at the FCC. At the same time, her company is lobbying the FCC and lobbying Congress on a host of telecommunications issues. And actually, about a month after Wayne Layton joined the agency, the FCC had a favorable ruling for a charter communications issue that they brought to the FCC. So, this is, I guess, what Craig Holman of Public Citizen told me, is a goldmine relationship that clearly Charter is aware of, and is potentially manipulating. We don't know this, but I do know that, I looked at some emails that I obtained, and Leighton and his wife Elizabeth Andrion were communicating about industry events hosted by Charter, and other agencies or other sort of conservative, telecom groups. Okay, I've got one more question I'm going to answer, and then I think it's probably time to wrap up. I encourage you to read the article. It's in the comments, to share it around, and I appreciate you guys supporting our work and having your eyeballs on our articles and on our live streams. Last question, Ellen Finazzi says, how could we, the public, ask our senators and representatives to look at this problem? That's always an important question. You should always, if you're a concerned citizen, you should always be reaching out to your U.S. reps, to your senators. They should be responsive to your questions. They are representing you, after all, in Congress. So I think drawing their attention to my article and to what we found here, that we have a clearly ideologically based department that's being set up at the FCC that is going to work with every single bureau in the FCC to help advance the policies that they want. So that's certainly something that should raise eyebrows. And I will say, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto has written a letter to Pai. She wrote it last year, and she was asking about the office and had some concerns about whether it would be fully dedicated to the public interest. Pai responded several months later. He did mention that they would have a public interest in mind, but he didn't really give a whole lot of specifics, and we're not going to really know how it operates until it begins to operate, which I suspect will be soon, but again, they wouldn't answer my question, so I don't know. But I do think writing to your members of Congress and bringing their attention to this, especially Senator Cortez Masto and other members of various committees that oversee the FCC. So you should look into which committees of the House and Senate oversee the FCC, and you should contact those people, because they're the people who it's their duty to be looking into concerns of their constituents. So, again, thanks for watching, and please make sure you follow us on Twitter at TYT Investigates, and my Twitter is at Alex Kotch, AlexKotch. We share a lot of good investigative work with you, and again, thank you so much for your support and for watching us. All right, I'll see you next time.